Answered prayer doesn't always mean no. It could mean not now. It could mean that you're not ready for the answer. But also, just because your prayer hasn't been answered in a way that is very obvious, that like even though it's not on flashing lights or on a bus or like you haven't had an out of body experience or you haven't heard it for yourself, doesn't mean that the answer is no. Potentially, God's working through someone else to get to you, God's telling someone else to tell you, or someone else is praying for the situation, or maybe you're a creative person so you hear it in a song, or you just have a feeling. It doesn't always have to be a specific voice that you hear, which you know. God works and responds to people in different ways because he responds in a way that you will be able to hear and recognize. So don't be put off because you haven't heard a voice. You don't always have to hear a voice. Another thing is that the answer may actually be no. I think lots of times unanswered prayers, we say it's unanswered because we haven't got the answer that we were wishing for, but potentially the answer is no, and it just isn't what is expected for your life. And that's okay too. I think we just have to trust and believe that God has a plan for our life, and the plan is a successful one and a positive one and will be for his glory eventually. And so we have to trust and believe and have faith that everything is in God's hands. Also, I think that sometimes we ask wide questions for a specific answer, and we need to start being specific. A prayer that you want an answer for needs to be specific enough for your answer to be what you want, to hit what you can be able to interpret. So if you're asking for a massive question like, God, why is there suffering? You can read the Bible and you can he can show you scriptures, or someone else can explain how they've interpreted it. But that may not be the reason why you're praying. Maybe it's, God, why is my mum suffering? Or why am I suffering? And that's a more specific question, you know? Try and be more to the point of what you want your answer, what you want to hear from God, because God will only answer the questions that you ask. And so if your question is large and very broad, your answer may also be very broad. So also take that into consideration. But yeah, I think unanswered prayers, yes, they're not the most ideal situation, but an unanswered prayer is an opportunity for you to show you have faith and to practice your faith. And that's not a bad thing.
So when people ask me what do I do about unanswered prayer, so unanswered prayer is really demoralizing sometimes because it's a really difficult relationship to maintain with God, because we're not always, it's not like a human relationship where you can talk to someone and it's really tangible and it's instant. So I think unanswered prayer can be quite, demoralizing. Especially when you're going through a period where you really need God's help, or you're really struggling about decisions, and you want God's input, and yet sometimes it feels like he's just not listening. And so in those times, what I have to keep reminding myself to do is going back to the Bible and looking at what has God promised me. He's promised me that he will be my God forever. He won't ever let me go, and he will continually work. He's continually working in my life, whether I see it or whether I don't. In Jeremiah 29:11, I believe, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you." And he knows already what's going on in our lives, and he's already working for us. And so I think despite prayers being unanswered, actually God's working. And I know people say, oh, it's not necessarily being answered now but later, and that can be really difficult too. But it's really good to remember that the promises that God has given, that he won't forsake us and that he is working for our good.